Well, what two basic categories does God's word indicate that Satan's strategies can be divided into? Well, first, we have the frontal attack. Now, that's characterized by bannings, imprisonment, threats, and acts of violence, such as it was used on our brothers in Malawi in the past and is being used today in Russia on our brothers. And you don't have to scratch your head and say, I wonder if I'm being persecuted. When you have the frontal attack, it's obvious, isn't it? It's clear, see, the frontal attack. Has this proved to be Satan's most successful method of attack? No, not really. Here's just one experience of thousands that could be related to substantiate this point. Now, this experience centers around a 29-year-old brother named August Dickmann. Now, you probably remember this experience, but he was put in Sachsenhausen concentration camp, 1937. But then 2 days or 3 days after World War II began, 1939, he was ordered to sign his military induction slip. Of course, he refused to do that. Now, the camp commander was furious. So he got permission from Himmler, the head of the SS Guard, to publicly execute August in front of all the camp inmates. And he arranged a special assembly after he got this permission, and he had Jehovah's Witnesses right down front where they would get the full impact of the execution of our dear brother. Well, after he was executed, all the other inmates were dismissed, but Jehovah's Witnesses had to stay. And with great enthusiasm, the camp commander said to the witnesses there, he said, "Who is now ready to sign the declaration?" Well, not one of more than 400 witnesses responded. But then two stepped forward. No, not to sign, but to ask that their signatures given about a year earlier be annulled. What a slap in Satan's face. And that really illustrates the poor success rate of this frontal attack. See, and many other experiences could be related.
We're watching Stephen Lett speaking at the 2021 annual meeting. His theme, "We can be victorious over Satan's attack." The whole purpose of the talk is to terrify Jehovah's Witnesses into thinking that Satan is out to get them. In this particular part of his talk, Stephen Lett is explaining the difference between a full frontal attack and a more insidious attack. By frontal attack, he's obviously referring to persecution, and I couldn't help but recoil when Stephen Lett said the following.
Well, first, we have the frontal attack. Now, that's characterized by bannings, imprisonment, threats, and acts of violence, such as it was used on our brothers in Malawi in the past and is being used today in Russia on our brothers.
By mentioning Malawi in this talk, in the context of persecution, in the same breath as Russia, Stephen Lett is almost taunting Jehovah's Witnesses here and almost celebrating their ignorance regarding the organization's past and its scandals. Because anyone who knows anything about Malawi and what really happened and the double standards that were applied in that particular part of Watchtower history between Jehovah's Witnesses in Malawi and Jehovah's Witnesses in Mexico, anyone who knows about all that would find this extremely offensive. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, please check out my video Betrayal, thumbnail here if Tibor is gracious, in which I go into the whole thing in more detail to try to imply that the two situations are similar. When in Malawi you had, well, I can't really describe it without my YouTube channel being at risk, but you had absolute barbarity being meted out against Jehovah's Witnesses in Malawi. The worst things that you could do to someone were done, witnesses were brutalized and murdered. Again, if you want more detail, please watch the video. In Russia, you have Putin's thuggish totalitarian regime rounding up witnesses, putting them in pre-trial detention, putting them in prison. In a minority of cases, the persecution spills into torture, which I've spoken out against in the strongest possible terms. To my knowledge, no Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia have yet been executed, and no Jehovah's Witness women in Russia have yet been raped. I'll just say the word and let the chips fall where they may with YouTube. And Stephen Lett is standing on the platform talking about these two examples of persecution against Jehovah's Witnesses as though they're the same. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, just think about this for a moment. You have the persecution in Malawi, and persecution is putting it mildly. You have atrocities against Jehovah's Witnesses in Malawi. And in Russia, you have witnesses being outlawed and thrown in jail. Of those two examples, guess which one gets awarded prophetic significance? So that the regime that's persecuting Jehovah's Witnesses is supposedly foreseen by the Bible prophet Daniel, and Daniel is inspired to write down certain language that applies to that regime. I'm sorry, it's an insult to the victims. It's an insult to the dead of Malawi for Russia to be given that kind of prominence, for Russia to be given that kind of focus, that kind of significance. And Stephen Lett has the gall to stand there on the platform knowing that millions of Jehovah's Witnesses don't know about the double standards, don't know about the scandal, and haven't really thought about what actually happened in Malawi. He knows he can bank on their ignorance, and he is brazenly playing on it. Then you have the tragic story of August Dickmann, a Jehovah's Witness who was executed in Sachsenhausen concentration camp. You can see where all of this is going, can't you? Stephen Lett is playing on the persecution complex, which the organization routinely does. Barely a convention or annual meeting goes by where they don't point to the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses, either past or present, as a means of manipulating the audience, as a means of reminding them that their organization is special, their religion is the chosen one because, look, we're being persecuted. I find the particular reference to August Dickmann's story fascinating because you can read about the whole account if you have the 1974 yearbook, the silver one. And actually, you don't need to actually possess a physical copy. You can read the story on Watchtower Online Library. Again, I read the whole account because I wanted a clearer picture of exactly what happened in this particular story. And the whole thing was incredibly tragic. My heart really did break for this poor man. And the brutal savagery that was inflicted upon him by the Nazi regime, it was terrible. And no one, as I've repeatedly said on this channel, no matter what grievances I have against the leadership, I have always spoken out against any religious minority being targeted, or indeed anyone being targeted due to their religious convictions. What happened to August Dickmann was despicable. It is, however, interesting when you read the story because it gives you a very good idea of how this organization has been exploiting persecution stories for decades and using them to stir up hysteria among followers. The way August Dickmann's death was reported or was covered in the yearbook, albeit decades after the event, was very intriguing. Allow me to read the final paragraph of the account. You'll see it says, "But what happened to Foursquare?" Foursquare was the pseudonym for the camp commander who we heard in Stephen Lett's talk had directly petitioned Heinrich Himmler for permission to execute August Dickmann. And Foursquare was the one who orchestrated the whole grisly assembly where August Dickmann was publicly executed, and he mocked and taunted Jehovah's Witnesses in doing so. It's all spelled out in the yearbook. Let's read the paragraph. "But what happened to Foursquare, who had mocked and challenged Jehovah as few humans ever had? He was seen in the camp only a few times after that, and then not at all. The prisoners found out, however, that shortly after August Dickmann's execution, he was struck with a terrible illness. He died 5 months later without ever having an opportunity of mocking Jehovah or his witnesses again. I have taken up a fight with Jehovah. We will see who is the stronger, I or Jehovah," Foursquare had said on March 20th, 1938, when he placed the brothers in the isolation crew. The battle had been decided, Foursquare had lost, and whereas our brothers were released from the isolation crew a few months later, and in certain instances received a certain amount of relief, the rumour continued to circulate throughout the camp that Foursquare was seriously ill, and that when officers visited him at his sickbed, he would whimper, "The Bible students are praying me to death because I let their man be shot." It is also a fact that after he had died, his daughter, when asked the cause of her father's death, would always answer, "The Bible students prayed my father to death." That's how they write about the story in the 1974 yearbook. Hasn't aged well, has it? Or if you're really going to believe this, if you're really going to believe that the camp commander was stricken by Jehovah, was somehow cursed so that he died for his persecution of the Bible students or Jehovah's Witnesses and his execution of August Dickmann, what does that tell us about God? What does that tell us about Jehovah? We're talking about a time in history when 6 million Jews were slaughtered. We're talking about one of the most despicable acts of genocide in all of human history happening not long after this or around the same time. And here we have supposedly God intervening over the death of one man. One man is executed in Sachsenhausen, and because he happens to be of the correct religion, Jehovah doesn't stop Arthur Dickmann being executed, because apparently, let's be clear, Jehovah has the ability to intervene in people's anatomy to the extent where he can kill someone. So that's the power that's being described here. Jehovah can manipulate Foursquare's anatomy so that he can die, but he can't be bothered tweaking a few electrochemical signals in the brain to stop a decision being made that one of his followers, one of his worshippers needs to die. So having this power to intervene and having this indeed willingness to intervene, Jehovah lets August Dickmann die in a very brutal situation, in a very brutal way, all the while thinking, don't worry, it's okay, it's all good. I have my own plan here. I'm going to show everybody who's boss in this situation. And a few months later, 5 months later, yeah, Now they all know who's boss, because I've killed Foursquare. And everything now is right in the world. This was how I needed to intervene at this particular point in human history. Never mind all of the death that's happening in Europe right now. Never mind the extermination of millions of Jewish people. At least with August Dickmann, I've avenged him. I've avenged one Jehovah's Witness. My work here is done. That's the sort of God that's being described in this paragraph. So thank you, Stephen Lett, for mentioning August Dickmann, which has led me to read this article, which I didn't know about before. And when you read the article, if anything, the way the organization has covered the death of August Dickmann is a disgrace to his memory.